I can say I like one watch versus another, but until I look at how I actually wear them over a course of a year, I don't really know. So today we're going to talk through what I wore and why I wore it from my entire collection throughout 2022. Happy New Year's to everyone that's watching it today. I know it's going to change and we're going to have 2023 start tomorrow. A lot of different things are going to be coming next year, but I want to walk through exactly what I wore and why I wore it. Number 7 or 8, depending on, because I have ones that tied, I'll call it number 8, would be the Hamilton Khaki Mechanical. It's what I wore the least this year. On an actual full day, I think I only wore it 3 times. So a very small percentage of the entire year, 0.82%. And I love the watch. I just really only wear it on special occasions, so I must have gone to the range very infrequently. And I know I wore a couple watches to areas where I typically wear the Hamilton that I didn't. So that one actually is probably going to leave the collection just because I never wear it. It just sits, and I want to try and keep watches that I wear, or at least compete for wrist time. Tied for 6th, least worn, I guess, but most worn watch would be the Apple Watch Ultra and the Seiko Turtle. And the Ultra I don't think is fair, only because I didn't wear it for a full day that often. I typically wore it only for like a workout. So I don't have like fractions of days in this calculation. I only wore it for 9 full days. From beginning of day to end of day, it was the watch that I wore. And so it's only really 9 times, and that tied with the Seiko Turtle. Again, I don't wear the Turtle very often. I typically only wear it when I'm, doing different construction work or in my warehouse. I typically keep it with me a lot of times as like a backup to strap on when I need to go out and unload something off of a truck. It's what goes on my wrist. But for a full day, I wore it very rarely, only about 9 times. Both of those would be about 2.5% of the year each. The 6th most worn watch would be my SPB143 from Seiko. And that's really interesting how my preference basically dropped off on that watch, because at the tail end of 2021, I wore that for an entire trip through Mexico, and I wore it quite a bit. I even wore it also on an entire trip down to Florida to see my grandparents. So I wore it a lot. It's just for whatever reason in 2022, it lost its preference in my mind, and so I just stopped wearing it. I think I started wearing the Speedmaster more and more and more, and so it kind of fell off, and so I didn't wear it very often. That's kind of why I sold it. I only wore it for 10 full days in 2022. And then I ended up selling it about midway through this year. Number 5 is the Tudor Pelagos 42, the original model with their in-house movement rather than the ETA. So when I originally had that in for review, I could not take it off. I only had it in my apartment for about a month, and I wore it almost every single day for that month. I wore it 26 times, and I only had it for maybe a little more than a month. So over the course of like, let's say 35 days, I wore it almost every single day. And that's how I knew I loved it. It's just, it didn't feel quite right, and I wanted to wait to find the perfect watch to kind of keep around. And so I knew it wasn't quite perfect for the way I wanted to wear it, and so that's why it ended up leaving. Plus, I think I bought it originally planning to review it, and I didn't want to keep everything in my collection at the time, and so I ended up selling it. But I loved the watch. I wore it out on a honeymoon, even though, it was just basically supposed to be a pass-through watch. It was by far a big part of what made me want the 39 is because how much I loved it. Number 4 is the Tudor Pelagos 39. I just talked about the original Pelagos. So the Pelagos 39 I wore since I got it in about mid-September or mid to late September. I've worn it about 41 times, and I've really forced myself to not wear it on many occasions. I expected I actually would wear it more, even though it was like 3 months that I've had it, that I would have worn it more, but I really tried to push myself into wearing my Explorer and my Explorer 2 a lot, mainly because I felt like I was ignoring my Explorer. So I wanted to make sure that I wore those, and so I think I pushed myself out more than I needed to. That's still 11% of the year, so I still wore it quite a bit. Love the 39, absolutely love it. It's got a lot of things that people like about it. Obviously, it doesn't have the same kind of glitz and glamour as like a steel watch, like the Black Bay 58, but for the way I like it, as just a tool watch that's really understated, it is perfect. And I know I've harped on the 39 a lot. I know a lot of people have actually messaged me and said it's my fault that they bought one. So if that's the case, apologies. Hopefully you enjoy it as much as I do. Number 3 is the Rolex Explorer. And in my watch collection video, I think I said that I only wear it on rare occasions or special occasions, and that's not entirely true. I wear it on a day-to-day basis just as much as some of my other watches. It just has a lower preference in my mind for whatever reason. I've seemed to gravitate towards wearing the Explorer 2, the Speedmaster when I had it, the Pelagos 39, and so I tend to think I'm not wearing it that often. I wore it 64 times times total. So that was about 17.5% of the year. So I still wore it. I mean, 2 months total of the year would have been me wearing it if I put it all together. So it doesn't have as much of like an occasional use. I do wear it pretty often. It's just sometimes I do have to push myself to wear it because I tend to just pick up the Explorer 2 or now the Pelagos 39 just as a knee-jerk reaction. And I like the sizing of those. I found myself a little bit more used to a larger case size. So it feels a little smaller sometimes, but especially if I wear it for a few days, I end up loving the case size again. So either way, that's kind of why I show preference. Number 2 is the Omega Speedmaster. I know if I had not bought the Explorer 2 and also sold the Omega Speedmaster, it would have dominated this entire year. I could not take it off, and I still miss it. Of all the watches I've ever sold, that is the watch I know I miss the most. There are a lot of times I look at my watch box and it feels incomplete, or it feels like I'm just not scratching the itch of what I want to wear today, which is an absurd thing to say. I have watches worth, you know, however much money. It's dumb for me to think that I need something different. But either way, the Speedmaster is just a watch that always gave me a certain feeling. And I know that I will be buying one in 2023. I know that for a fact. It's just a matter of which one I'm gonna get. And I've talked about that before, but the Speedmaster is a watch I can't take off. I love the design, the way it works. I use the chronograph function actually quite a bit. And so all of that is kind of all tied together. So the Speedy will be coming back, hopefully in 2023. And for this year, I wore it a grand total of 86 times. And given the fact that I really only wore it for the first 6 to 7 months of the year, that's a huge majority of that first part of the year. And then I kind of put it away because I knew what I wanted to do. I just had a hard time selling it. So I kind of, you know, set it aside and waited. That was 23.56% of the year. And my number 1 watch, if you've done process of elimination, you know what that is the Explorer 2. And I bought that in May. So I got it, you know, midway basically through the year. And then as soon as I got it, it has just dominated. If you look at photos of me and my family throughout the course of this year, I am wearing that Explorer 2 almost every single day. When we picked up my dog, who was a puppy at the time, when I went with her parents to Topgolf or hung out with her parents when they were in town, when we went on trips, when I went skiing, when I did anything, that Explorer 2 was on my wrist. And I've changed the straps a lot. I've had moments where I didn't like it. I've had moments where I like it. You know, I get bored sometimes with the steel bezel with a steel bracelet. So I find that a contrasting strap is really ideal for me. I'm going to do a follow-up video about the Explorer 2 and my feelings about it in a couple weeks, if not next week, talking through also when I took it on a ski trip recently. And it was a great companion. It was perfect for it. So I want to talk through that and kind of why I like it so much and why it's really embedded itself as the key piece of my collection these days. I wore it 117 times, or 32% of the year. So almost a third for one watch I got halfway through the year, which sounds to me a lot like I wore it quite a bit. I'm sure if you asked my wife, she would tell you that that was the one that I never took off. That's pretty much it. Just wanted to cover the watches in my collection that I wore quite a bit. There are some watches that are in my collection technically that I didn't show as me wearing. That's because I didn't wear them for a full day. I'd wear them occasionally, put them on for a few hours and then put them back. And so they didn't really make it as the watch I wore that day. Do you guys do similar things? Do you keep spreadsheets? Do you have percentages? What did you wear the most this year? Let me know in the comments below. Always fun to kind of talk with everyone down there and see what people wore, what they enjoyed the most this year. It also helps me get an idea of what's popular out there and what I should potentially cover on the channel going into 2023. Happy New Year's, guys. I will see you next year. Please do me a favor and subscribe. As I've said before, the more people that subscribe, the more often I can get watches in so I don't have to buy them personally. And I will see you next year. Take care.